Hello and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile, and this is the show where I get to talk about sports, I get to talk about business, I get to talk about everything in between. Today, my incredible guest, I have Haley Rosen. She's the founder of Just Women's Sports. Haley, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Founder. It's a pretty cool word, right? Like, it's kind
Yeah,
of
I'll take
yeah,
that one. I
yeah,
like that
right. You're
one.
doing something. You're doing something with your life. I mean, we're all stuck in a pandemic and can't really leave our house. So happy to see that you're rocking and rolling with something. But Haley, very excited to talk about Just Women's Sports. It's a media company that focuses specifically on women in sports and women's sports. So very excited about that. Push the bar, push that forward a little bit. But Haley, the first question I have for everybody on the
Okay.
For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
Oh, big question right out of the
I
gate.
know, right? It's a fun one. It gets the juices flowing a little bit. I always
Yeah.
like it.
Why do I love sports? I fell in love with soccer when I was really, really young. I idolized Mia Hamm. I had her Barbie doll. I had her poster. I fell in love with soccer. And like, even now, like, I don't play anymore. But when you say, like, why do you love sports? Like, I think about those moments on the field where there's no thought, there's no thinking, and you're just competing. And it's almost this out of body experience. And like, I love that. And it's now fun as a fan to watch people do that and like just like see people have these big games where they're just, I don't know, they're just functioning on another level. Like I love watching it. I love it all. I love the drama. I even like I've never been a big baseball person, but watching the World Series right now, I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know. I love it all. I love the competition. I love watching people push themselves to be the best they can. Um, yeah, I don't know. I love sports.
Right? That's for the love of
Yeah.
sports. That's why I do this, right?
Yeah.
Could I just ask you if you don't mind just tilting your laptop just a little bit forward so we can just see some more of you? There we go. I
Yeah.
mean, you have a nice ceiling, don't get me wrong, but I do wanna
You
get a
don't
little
want
bit of
more of
you.
that? There's a
I
nice
mean, it's
ceiling
nice.
fan.
I like your ceiling fan. It's got some, like, wires or something attached to it. We'll get to that in a little bit, I
It's
think, but
fancy.
I agree, like, the drama of it all, the competition,
Hmm.
it's something when you learn this, it's one of those things that's real life, right? I've said it only a million times on the show. I'm gonna can say it probably another million times. It's like the only unscripted reality TV show. Like, we don't
Yeah.
know what's gonna happen, right? That World Series, I'm a huge baseball fan, so I'm very excited. I'm loving watching it. You know, that Cody Bellinger home run the other night. Just how
So
do you look
big.
cooler than that? Honestly, I
Yeah.
don't know anybody that has ever have, but it's just been so much fun to watch and enjoy, and specifically baseball, that's drama, right? Like, it's that huge amount of suspension, and because we're just waiting on every single pitch. And for soccer, I'm starting to enjoy that a little bit more now. We have I'm here in New Jersey, so betting's made everything a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more exciting. But I guess, you went to Stanford, played soccer there. That's like one of the best schools, give or take. I mean, you could toot your own horn here. You're more than welcome. But I mean, getting to that level of sports and academics, let's not hold that one back either. How how did you learn to get to that point, right? Because you don't have that type of drive, you don't have that type of determination when you wake up when you're like 5 years old out of bed. Like, where did you gain those skills, and where did you learn to love playing that hard and working that hard for something that is kind of like, hey, someone can always be better than you at any point in time?
Yeah. Um, hmm. These are big questions right out of the gate.
Well, so here, I'm gonna connect this just to let people, like, know how the sausage is made. I'm gonna connect this to being an entrepreneur in a little
All
bit.
right, here we go. Here we go. I'm ready.
I got you.
um, I was always like psycho competitive. I was actually just talking to my mom about this. Like when I was in fourth grade, I got second in a spelling bee and they handed me a ribbon and I threw it at the teacher and kicked over the microphone.
Okay.
And I got in trouble and the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I've always been like a psycho competitor, just like want to be the best, really hard on myself. And I, like I said before, like I absolutely fell in love with soccer at a really young age, and I fell in love with the process, and I fell in love with how it felt when you strike the ball clean, or when you're just in that rhythm and you're beating defenders, or you're finding that pass. Like, just fell in love with every part of it, and just wanted to be the best I could be. And I mean, I've talked about this a little bit. I think for me personally, my athletic story, I think is almost like a cautionary tale, because I was so competitive, so committed, wanted to be the best, that I think a lot of my story was overtraining. In college, I had 4 season-ending injuries, and I only played 1 full season my 5th year, and had to retire early because of injuries. So I think the hard work and obsessing over it, and like want to be the best, like had that in spades. I've only learned more recently how to have that balance, and that, it's not all about working hard, it's working smart, and you need those off days. And that's a lesson that I learned the hard way in sports that I very much tried to apply to my professional career.
Yeah, and it's something, it's unfortunate, but you had to learn it at some point, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't learn it during playing soccer, you were probably gonna learn it as starting your own business where you would have just
Yeah.
burnt yourself out anyway. So it sounds like at least you have that mental understanding of what is necessary. And I don't mean to bring this up, but I have to ask, what is the word that you spelled wrong?
Lettuce. And I knew how to spell it because I said S instead of C because I was like, oh,
Oh,
I got this. And I just misspoke.
oh,
So
geez.
maybe that's why I was so mad.
Yeah, I would have been pretty angry too. Lattuce, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, but I just
Got it.
said
Okay.
S and then I was
Yep.
like, C, C. And then they're like, nope.
Oh no. Yeah.
Isn't it
Taking
weird that I
back.
remember that? That's like how crazy I am. That was in
No, I
fourth
I
grade.
kind of expected that you would remember it. That's why I had to ask the question. I kinda knew if you were that angry, kicking over the microphone stand. Good for you though. I appreciate the fiery nature, the competitiveness, right? And I guess so, going to Stanford, as you said, and unfortunately having 4 season-ending injuries, were you ever told that you were overworking or doing too much? Or, I mean, at some point, I'm assuming, or most of the time, it sounds like you were unfortunately were just rehabbing. So I assume, would have had a very strict, very like regimented plan. Were you not following that plan? Were you going harder and saying like, oh, I can get back faster? Like what? 4 season-ending injuries doesn't happen by mistake. It normally happens because you're doing something wrong. So I'm kind of curious from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think it was twofold. Like a big part of it was me. Like I would get injured and then as soon as I'd be cleared, like I would want to catch up. So
Mhm.
I would want to do extra, I'd be doing extra reps, like it'd be this rush to get back on the field. So big part of it was me. And I feel like once you feel like you're behind, that cycle of like trying to play catch up is just like very toxic. Another part of it though is I do think that the college program is very cookie cutter, especially I think in some of the women's sports, like there isn't the resources to say like, all right, you're this body type, you play this position, like we're going to tailor your training in this way. So everyone did the same lifting program, everyone did the same running program. And like my story, like a lot of my injuries came down to my hamstring. And a lot of that is like running too much. And I think had there been maybe like more resources or more thought going into it, like my training program would have been tweaked. And I think that would have prevented a lot of injuries. So, I mean, it's a big part of like, we want to push forward women's sports. We want more media attention. We want more resources. And I think ultimately that leads to better on field play, just across the board.
Yeah, I mean, more eyeballs is going to lead to more dollars in some capacity, and understanding that I'm pretty confident. Please tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident the football team right at Stanford is probably getting the utmost of those dollars, and each of those gentlemen is getting that very specific plan on what they need to do and how they need to do it. So yeah, I mean, if we can get more eyeballs onto just women's sports in general, and the U.S. women's national team's been doing a pretty damn good job at that over the last couple of years. So shout out to them and those
Yep.
ladies for what they're doing. So I guess that just sucks. I guess really that just kind of just comes down to it sucks, huh?
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is bad luck too. The college season is like 2 months, 2.5 months, maybe three if I'm misremembering. Like, I think it's just bad luck, right? Like I don't think it's crazy to miss a month of the year because you rolled an ankle or you tweak something. Like that's very reasonable, but I think it's a bit of bad luck when it's like, and it happens to always
Mhm.
fall over the season.
Yeah, that is just a very unfortunate event. But
Yeah,
hey, it is what it is. As you
it
said,
is
you
what it
learned
is.
something from it, and we power forward, we move forward. So after your 5th year at Stanford, what what was the next step? I mean, it sounds like kind of soccer was out of the question at that point. Didn't really seem like there was playing a potential. And please tell me if I'm mistaken there. But I guess what was after that 5th year at Stanford?
So actually a little different than that. My fifth year was my first healthy season and it was awesome. We had a great year. I personally had a great year and it was like really fun. I felt like a freshman as like the
Hmm.
oldest person on the field. I really wanted to pursue a 6 year. So looked into that pretty seriously, didn't enter the NWSL draft, didn't look at professional options. I was going to do that because I had two red shirts. Basically at the very last minute, there had been a paperwork error, and I actually did not have my 6 year of sixth year of eligibility. So yeah, I don't,
That sounds
that's
like BS. Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
how does that just happen? It's like, oh no, never mind. We like how does that
It
something like
was
that happen?
basically something with my physical therapy my freshman year, like paperwork wasn't filed correctly. So it didn't count as a medical red shirt the second time, which made
Okay.
me
Mhm.
ineligible for my
Yeah.
sixth year. Like a bunch of BS, BS,
Yeah.
BS. But from there, I went and basically tried out for the Washington Spirit and played with them for a little bit. I went abroad to the UK and played, in the Scottish Premier League, and we played in Champions League, which was really fun. I
Holy
was
crap.
briefly with the Seattle Reign, who's now the OL Reign. So kind of did the professional scene for a little bit, but never. I don't think I ever really like found a home in the professional sphere. I didn't have a great entry point. Kind of was again playing catch up. Had more injuries, but did it for about like a year, 2 years, and it was awesome. And
Oh yeah.
that's really the experience that led me to what I'm doing today, which I'm happy to speak more on if that's
We'll
if
get
that's
there.
where you want to go.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. But I mean, you got paid to play the sport you love. Like,
It
let's
was
reflect
awesome.
on that for a second. Like, how cool is it? Like, you did it your entire life because you loved it, right? You did it your entire life. You then get to go to school. I don't know what the scholarship was. I hope you got something. But then you actually are starting to receive a check. Now, I don't know how big those checks are, but I don't care
Wasn't a
how big
big
those.
check.
Hey man, if someone paid me $100 to go out there and swing a baseball bat, I would do that every day of my life. I think it would be pretty cool. So it sounds like you're at least having some fun, and like the opportunity to then travel around as well. Champions League, it's on right now as of recording for some of the biggest clubs in Europe over there for the men's side. I don't actually know when the women's one is, but that's just so cool. Like, how much
It was
fun
so
did you have?
cool.
Like
It
that
was
couldn't
so
have been any
fun.
cooler.
Yeah, it was so fun. I mean, it was so fun. You get to play. I mean, the NWSL, I think in particular, is a really, really high level. Like, I don't think people really realize that. Soccer in the US, like the US women's national team is the best, right? So it was a really, really high level. I think that's the most I improved in like a period of time in my whole career. And it was just fun. It was just so fun. Like you're playing soccer every day. That's your whole thing. It was a really fun experience. It was really different than college.
Mhm.
College, you have a ton of resources. You're treated like an absolute professional. You have, I was talking about the lack of resources in college, but you go to the professional level and it's a step down from that too. But you're still like you're around other people who think like you, love soccer the way you do, or live in that life, and like it's just a good time. It's fun.
I love it. I think it is so cool. And yes, I do then want to kind of segue. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Into what you're doing now. So
Yeah.
you leave the professional soccer realm. Do you then go and try and pursue a job somewhere? Do you try and like, hey, I kind of want to like work, like see what corporate America's like, that kind of thing? How did that probably sucked, I'm assuming.
No, I like towards the end of it, like I kind of my story is like I had a torn labrum in my hip that I kept trying to
Oh,
push through. And it basically got to a point where it's like I couldn't do it anymore. So I hung it up, got the surgery, and became a real person. I got a real job. And I was like, I love this job. This job was actually my dream job. While I was at Stanford as an undergrad as a graduate student, I worked in the virtual reality lab, and we did a bunch of research around like how virtual reality is great for training. Started in like football, but then like training just generally for corporate America or learning all this stuff. It was really, really awesome. That professor who led all that research teamed up with a coach at Stanford who was using VR for Stanford football training,
mhm.
and they started a company called Striver. And I thought what they were doing was super cool. So when I hung it up, I went and joined that company. It was very early stage at the time, which was like really fun. I've always been attracted to building something and startups and creating change and all of that. And it was like a really awesome experience. We were working with NFL teams. We were working with Walmart, BMW, doing all the stuff that I had researched in the lab. So I did that for a little over a year before I started doing things with just women's sports.
Mhm. That is so cool. Yeah, I mean, that's VR is obviously coming. It's kind of here. We see the Oculus commercials all the time now. I think last Christmas was when they became very, very popular, and hopefully they keep being popular. But it is so cool, right? The training aspect for sports specifically, but then everything else, I think it does come into effect. I had one a really long time ago. I got one with my Samsung Galaxy like S6 or whatever.
Yep.
And there was like this horror game that back then it really like it was trash if you look at it now, but back then it got me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no.
It definitely got me. It's pretty cool. But
Yeah,
that
VR is
is
wild.
that sounds pretty awesome. There's actually a girl that I met, Megan. Megan, if you're listening, and maybe I can introduce you to Haley because Haley knows people. She's trying to get into VR specifically in the sports space, so maybe you can kind of push her in the right direction.
Yeah,
So,
happy
Megan, if
to.
you're paying attention, that'd be awesome. But now let's get into Just Women's Sports. It is a media company again surrounding women's sports. Pretty easy. I love the
Yeah.
name. Very on point. Let's not try and make this too fancy. Let's make it
Yep.
very open and honest.
Exactly. You get it.
So I do appreciate that. And I guess so hanging out with this startup, this VR company, we all kind of know VR is the future. You probably had a sweet job. As you said, you were really enjoying it. What is the, I guess, where's the light bulb moment of saying like, hey, like I want to go do this thing. And then I actually want to hear about the start of the execution moment when you actually flip that switch to say, okay, like I'm going to leave this job and I'm going to go make another startup.
Yeah, so I think it had been building for a while. Like when I was playing at Stanford, we were super popular on campus. Like we sold out most of our games. They had to build extra seats in the stadium to
Oh yeah.
like it was awesome. And then when I was playing professional a little bit too, it was the same type of thing. In the US and abroad, we were selling out stadiums, attendance was up, viewership was up. Fans were waiting outside for hours to get autographs from girls that like didn't even see the field, like just a ton of positive momentum. And then when I was working at Striver, that was the first time I was like outside looking in. Like I wasn't a part of that world. I didn't know what was going on. And there was genuinely no way to follow it, which you sort of talked about before. I wanted to follow my friends that were still playing, the teams I had been on, the leagues I had been a part of. And I just genuinely couldn't do it. And that didn't make any sense to me. And it didn't match the opportunity that I had seen in the space. So Just Women's Sports, that's like the whole idea. We initially, the first thing I ever did was start an Instagram account, which is actually how we got our name. The initial idea was born out of, hey, like there's a lot of these accounts that highlight, men's sports, and that's like really cool and exciting. But why isn't there one that highlights just women's sports? And so I was like, oh, it's Instagram. Anyone can do that. Yep. Nice. That's us. That's us. So that's, we grabbed the username Just Women's Sports because it was available. And that's kind of how the whole company started. From that Instagram account, we were able to raise like a small pre-seed round to like really just get the company going. And we officially launched in January of this year, which, by the way, what a year to launch a company.
I was going to say, great time to do that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And we've been cooking ever since.
You peaked, Haley. You made it on the For the Love of Sports podcast. So congratulations to
Thank
you.
You. Thank you.
But that is, I mean, it is so sad, right? And I love the tagline you guys have. And please, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something like, you just say it. I'm just going to screw it up.
4% sports coverage is dedicated to women's sports. We're here to change that.
Yes. And I appreciate that. And I think it is so important. Obviously we'll see every once in a while, obviously with the Olympics. I feel like that's when men's and women's sports is like as close to equal as, seeing what, the women are doing, the men are doing, because it's less of, it's more just like anybody in red, white, and blue we're going to root for at that point.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It's very confusing why at that point in time is the one time we choose is those 20 days. But I think outside of that, right, like the NWSL, I've heard the name. I know that there's a couple girls from the U.S. women's national team, a couple women from the U.S. women's national team that are there. Outside of that, I think Budweiser had like a cool ad with them.
Yeah,
and that's like essentially all I know, unfortunately. And like that's the thing, because granted, I'm not going, trying to physically seek it out, but I'm not going to try and physically seek out most of the news that comes to me. Most of it just comes to me. It's like the Bleacher Reports, the ESPNs of the world that unfortunately don't bring me that information when, everything else is, they told me, oh, LeBron wore a different shoe today. It's like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Like, I don't give a shit if LeBron wore a different shoe. It doesn't do anything for me. So I guess, so how, as you said, you got this pre-seed round. What do you do with that money? I'm not going to ask you how much unless you want to tell us. Like, what do you do with like a pre-seed round? It's just like, all right, so do you start writing? Do you start finding writers? Like, how exactly does that work?
Yeah, no, that's like a really great question. We asked ourselves that for a really long time, because it was like, when we raised this round, it was like, I had just started this Instagram account and I was just experimenting. It was like basically this thesis that like, I think there should be more attention on women's sports. I think other people care. Like, how could I get started? What can I do? Right. And then that account grew really quickly, which is actually, that's how we raised around. Like I had an account with like 10,000 followers and I was like, I think there's something here. And they're like, cool, me too, like
Mhm.
go. But then what does go mean, right? Because
Yeah.
we say, I see 4% and I think huge opportunity, right? But I also like, it's also just white space. Like this space is like, there's nothing that exists. So how do you start? Like, what is, you look at like the Athletic, for example, like they've carved out their really high quality writing, or Overtime, right? They're like social clips. Like, where do you start when there is nothing? So that was a really big question. So we actually decided to start with a newsletter, which I don't think is like super sexy, but the idea was, how can we, with limited resources, get news in front of people, week over week? And how can we just sort of be that one-stop shop for everything you need to know really quickly in women's sports? So we started as a newsletter, really quickly learned that 4% is not even enough to curate a weekly newsletter. So with two people, we started, doing original reporting and interviews and like creating a website to like really build out the women's sports content. We more officially turned on our social channels, started Twitter and, did the whole thing.
Mhm.
And for us, like Q1 and Q2 was really about, I just say like turning on, like building out the initial Just Women's Sports ecosystem, and like just, trying to learn and understand this space and who is the audience and what do they want and where are they listening or watching this stuff. Like, how do we just start building that? And I think over the first 2 quarters, like that, it was a lot of learning and just understanding. And then for us, like one of our biggest learnings was that a lot of this audience is listening to podcasts, which is,
Hey,
you love podcasts too.
appreciate you coming on.
So, for us, we more officially launched Q3 with our podcast. And for us, like we view that as like, for the next year or so, like we think audio is going to be like a huge win for us, and for a lot of reasons. Audio is cheap to produce, it's high impact, low cost. Most of our audience is listening to podcasts. And lastly, like I love teaming up with the athletes. I love
Mhm.
like letting them cover the space in their own words and their own voice. And I think audio really lets us do that. It really lets us create like really unique content. So, for us, like we want to aggressively push into that space over the next year.
That is awesome. And newsletter might not be sexy, but I know it's super, super important. I have some
Yeah.
friends over, I'm sure you're familiar, with Front Office Sports, where they
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about the business in sports. Love them. Definitely go check them out after you go subscribe to the Just Women in Sports, Just Women in Sports. I
There
apologize.
you go.
Newsletter. And I asked them, I'm acquaintances, I guess, with the two dudes that started it. And I was like, why are you pushing so hard for the newsletter? It's like the easiest thing to scale. If we can
Yeah.
scale the newsletter, we can say we have this many eyeballs every single morning. We can
Yep.
then drive that traffic directly to our website. That's how you gain advertisement. That's how you gain partnerships. And that's how, Haley, you go and gain some money. So no,
Yeah.
newsletter I think is awesome. I guess when you say 4% isn't enough for a weekly newsletter, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. So our vision, like what our newsletter is basically we curate, it's like 8 to 10 of the top stories in women's sports.
Mhm,
And what we realized is that with 4% of coverage, like there wasn't enough to
mhm,
do that. There wasn't enough news to really do that. So we were having to do like original reporting and digging and try and get interviews and quotes. And then also, it was a total lack of coverage, but then we also felt like the coverage that did exist just didn't authentically represent the space. Like it was a lot of pink and glitter. It was a lot of lifestyle. And it's like, your first question, like you asked me, why do you love sports? I didn't say because like, oh, I learned how to eat right and really healthy
mhm.
body, like whatever, like that's part of it.
Yeah.
But like you love sports because you love sports, and
Mhm,
these women like we just did this podcast with NECA, and she was like, a lot of people understand the WNBA as like activists, and like we push for a lot of change, and I'm really proud of that. But we ball too, and I was
yeah.
like, "Yep, that's it." And that's like what we try and push on. That like these women, like they're excellent athletes, and like sports are cool, and this is just more sports.
Mhm. Yeah, more sports. I mean, it's still sports, right? Like I
Yeah,
want to see people at the highest possible level compete against each other. I don't care who you are or honestly what you're doing half the time, especially after not having sports for 4 months. I will be very honest. I'll watch anything at this point. And I have to
yeah,
always remind myself like, "Hey, Mike, remember, we didn't have sports for 4 months. So take as much in as you possibly can." So I always do. And I mean, I'm a very big fan of Women's March Madness. All the
yeah,
March Madnesses, of course. Women's March Madness is great. Like, obviously, less upsets, but that's kind of cool too, because I want to see Mississippi State. I want to see UConn. I want to see South Carolina. I want to see Stanford in the Final Four, because I want to see the best at their sport play against each
yeah,
other. It's always more fun that way. And then the women's College World Series, the softball, the NCAA
yeah,
College World Series. those are awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I stayed up for that entire Oklahoma-Florida game, however many years ago that was,
Yeah.
16 innings, whatever it was, had multiple home runs, and they kept coming back, and that thing was nuts. Like, it is so
Yeah.
much fun. I don't care who's playing that game, I wanna watch it, and that's what I think that's the weirdest part, right? Like, and maybe not weirdest, so I apologize, that's poor terminology, but that's the one thing that's most confusing to me, right? So we love college football here in America. We love it. I
Mhm.
sit down on Saturdays. I'm gonna sit down this Saturday. I'm gonna watch probably like a solid 8 to 10 hours of it, and I'm
Y
gonna love every second of it.
Yep.
But then on Sunday, I love NFL more because it's professional, because these people are better than they were in college. Why did that not happen with so many women's sports? As you said, with the NWSL, if it's better competition, if it's fiercer, more competitive, and it's a just all around better product, right? Like, people complain, it's like, why do you like college basketball? You should like the NBA. It's like, it's a good point. It's just a better product. Why is there that much more, and it's still a small amount, but why is there that much more coverage around women's college sports and not
Mm.
the professional side?
I don't know if that's totally true. I think the sports coverage, I think like women's basketball during March Madness gets a lot of attention, but I think on the whole, it's like pretty comparable.
Okay.
Um, but I do think like everything you're kind of saying, like this is like what we talk about all the time is
Mhm.
like, I think any conversation that's like, well, men are bigger, stronger, faster. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
but like,
that's
I'm curious.
biology. Who
Like
cares?
that's biology. Like, okay. But like, I'm curious for you. Like when you ask people like, why do you love sports? Like how, I mean, I feel like most of the answers are probably around competing and watching people push to be the best they can be. And like, 3 seconds left on the shot clock and someone like coming through big time, like that is what we love about sports. And I don't mean to put words in your mouth or your
Yeah,
guest's mouth,
that's
but
honestly mostly what they usually say, competition and, like, learning, like, about themselves kinda thing.
yeah, it's like it's the journey and it's like what sports unlock and it's like the drama and all of that. And it's like women's sports has all of that. And I think like, for us, it's like any conversation again that's like, well, LeBron can jump higher. It's like, okay, yeah, but like, hitting a game winner, men or women, like it's still sick. It's still a game winner. It still makes you stand up and cheer, and like that's what's so fun about it for me.
Well, that was what? That was the Notre Dame a couple years ago, right? I can't
Yeah,
remember that girl's name, but that was incredible. Hit game winner over Mississippi
twice.
State. Yeah, like
Yep.
right. That was nuts. Like, that was cool. I loved it. Jumped out of my seat the whole nine, and that's what
Right.
I love
Yeah.
about sports. Like, yeah, okay, LeBron is bigger. Dude's like he's bigger than every person on planet Earth. Who
Yeah.
cares? Like, you're not going to compare to him. I'm not going to compare to him, so it doesn't matter. Most of these girls could probably kick your ass in basketball anyway. Like, who? So who cares? Like, I don't know why that's a big deal. So it is always just very confusing. So I guess, and you say it is comparable, but then I would kind of almost push back and say, well, then why am I not seeing it, or why am I not noticing it? Why am I not noticing? We'll see the most coverage that I saw, and this is kind of indicative of again, the men versus women's sports. The most coverage of the WNBA bubble that I saw was all the pictures of the NBA players wearing that sweatshirt,
It's
which
wild.
is what
Yeah.
exactly, right? Like, that's the most coverage that I saw. It's just like Chris Paul's wearing this sweatshirt. He's such, he helps like so well, like thumbs up Chris Paul. But then I didn't actually hear anything about the WNBA. I just heard about this damn sweatshirt, which looks pretty cool, by the way.
It's
I
a
think
cool
it's nice.
hoodie.
Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty darn cool. But like, again, that's like kind of indicative of what I'm talking about, where it's like, okay, we got a little bit of coverage and, baby steps, I guess, at some point, but like, why aren't we seeing those buzzer beater? Why am I not seeing not we,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't want to speak further. Why am I not seeing those buzzer beaters? Why am I not seeing those game-winning shots, or Angel McCautry drop like 25, 10, and 10? Like, why don't I see
Yeah.
that? Am I blind to it, or am I just not receiving it? Am I not going to find that information? Like, where is the disconnect, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I think, and like what we say is, for women's sports was born out of Title IX, right? And there was a long period of time where like girls were not playing and staying in sports, and then we can basically directly see like birth of Title IX, and then since that moment, there's been like over 1,000% increase in the amount of girls playing at the high school level, and then over a 600% increase in the amount of women playing at the collegiate level, and then we can also see that a similar trend at the professional level. So like there's been this massive rise in women's sports and participation, interest, viewership, all that. And that's happened relatively recently. This has been in the last 20 years or so, right? And my theory on this is, ESPN, Bleacher Report, a lot of the more mainstream traditional sports outlets, like they built their networks on men's sports. And if you go to ESPN right now, like their tagline is NFL and MLB, NBA, men's sports leagues. And that's totally okay, right? But like these are outlets that cover men's sports and their audience is there to watch men's sports. And I think it's just a different model. And I think it's totally okay, but it leaves this huge opportunity, I think, for someone to go grab that women's sports coverage and build the platform that covers and focuses on just women's sports, which is obviously what we're trying to do.
The name again, I think it
Yeah.
is fantastic. It really does help, and I appreciate that. Like, that is very true, right? Like, ESPN probably, as they thought when they were doing it, was kind of out of the kindness of their heart, they started to kind of pay attention. And I used air quotes for anybody just listening to the podcast, just to make sure. Like,
Yeah.
they just kind of did that to be like, oh, like, oh, this is nice. Like, let's kind of talk about this. But you're 100% correct with Title IX. It has allowed more women and more girls to continue playing sports because there is that opportunity for that scholarship, which is extremely important. And now we're starting to see that come to fruition a little bit, which is great. And it's just crazy to me. 4% is just such a small number.
Yeah.
Do we know where that 4% is broken down? Like, I'm kind of curious, like, what is that for? Like, is half of that just like women's base softball and basketball, and then the other half is X, Y, and Z, or is it just kind of a general statistic?
That's a general statistic. I actually
Okay,
don't know
cool.
the breakdown,
Yeah,
but
I'm
I'd
just
be
kind of curious.
curious.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because
Yeah.
I'm interesting because I'm interesting. You're right. I'm interested because
Yeah.
like I'm kind of curious to see how that breakdown is, because especially if that 4% happens over 1 month in March and then 1 month in June, it's like, well, surprisingly, the other 10 months out of the year, we should, it's not crazy to see, like, if that 4% was spread out a little bit more, maybe that has potential to grow a little bit. But it's definitely just as I said, I'm just going to kind of ask you stuff when it comes up. So if you don't know
Yeah.
the answer, that's something we can go back and look on.
Yeah, we'll have to do more research. I'm not sure.
Love it. So you were talking about before kind of that white space aspect, right? Like, you can kind of go and do whatever you want now. We're now I'm curious. You bring up the ESPNs. They build their, they built their entire conglomerate, got bought by Disney. So crossing my fingers for you there, Haley. But get bought by Disney. Now they do all the streaming. And so when are we going to see some games on just women's sports? Is that,
It's a
no, I'm
great
kidding.
question.
Oh, is it actually?
Yeah,
Is it coming?
no. So,
I mean, it's
for
coming
me,
eventually, right?
I mean, that's our big vision, right? Like, we are like so early on this journey. And I think,
Mhm.
I think there's a lot that needs to happen, but I think there's like two things that really need to happen in women's sports is, first off, the games need to be more accessible. Like, we hear all the time, people don't know when they're happening or how to watch. And they're often behind a paywall or on a random site or on ESPN 108, people don't know how to watch these games. So the games need to be readily accessible. And then on the other side of it, those games, they need content, they need promotion. We need to know the storylines. We know who's beefing, who's playing really well, who's having a bad season. Like, we need to build the universe and the culture. And I think for us, like, our big vision, what we want to be is everything you need to see and know in women's sports. And we want it all. And that means that, yeah, we want that beat coverage and we want to do premium content and we want to build our podcast network. But I think that also means for us, like, streaming is like that North Star. We want to put ourselves in a position where we're able to stream the games. And I mean, I know that like all sounds lofty, but like
Why not?
having, yeah, but I
Why
think
not?
it's like absolutely where we need to push. And I also think, like, just to double down on this too, like, we work very loosely with Athletes Unlimited, which has done awesome stuff in softball and now lacrosse and volleyball's coming up. Like, love what they're doing. They were able to get on mainstream media channels. Their games were on ESPN, and ESPN, there wasn't any articles. The games weren't marketed or promoted. There was no social posts about the softball, and that's just not good enough. And they performed well, but how well could they have performed if there had been resources and
Mhm.
attention pumped into it? And that's what we want to do. That's where we want to go.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right?
Why
Like,
not?
the space needs it, as we've obviously pointed out, and the space could utilize it. And if there's a company like Just Women's Sports to do that, I mean, why the heck not? Now, obviously, as you said, it's a little lofty, and I mean, but like, why did you start this company if you just wanted to kind of like, just kind of cover the sports, right? No, you're trying to go to the top, which I think is cool. But I guess so if we're looking at that North Star and we're reverse engineering all the way back, we're Q3 of year one now, right? Or is this Q4 technically? I think, right?
Yeah,
Or
I think
no,
we're in
yeah,
Q4. This year's
technically
flying
Q4.
by.
So, like, how like, as you said, like, Q1 and Q2 was like, "Let's get a newsletter and let's start figuring stuff out, and, okay, now we need to do our own reporting," which I think is honestly the best way to go. Like, you have to go out and you have to gain that credibility within the space, right? And then this, Q3, as you said, really started to ramp up some other social things and everything. So I guess, again, streaming might be a couple years down the road. I don't think it's as far as it sounds, right? Like the dollars, unfortunately or fortunately, double-edged sword there. It's not going to be as crazy to get that stuff, right? Like it's not like this ungodly amount, and it's not $1 billion for the college football
Right.
playoff, right? So
Right.
I think that part helps a little bit. But how do you reverse engineer something that big when only a couple months ago, and I don't mean to sound facetious, but only a
No, no,
couple
no.
months ago, you were trying to figure out how to do a newsletter, right? Like,
No,
how do you reverse
absolutely.
engineer that?
No, absolutely. And look, like I think we have to push ourselves to think bigger in women's
Hell yeah.
sports. And I think, we have for so long it's been like, all right, we're going to give women's sports a little bit and see what they do. But like look at the XFL, like how many hundreds of millions of dollars is
Mhm.
pumped into that, right? And so like
And it keeps failing.
and it keeps
It's
failing,
like, just
sure.
keeps failing over and over again, and everyone's like, "No, throw more money at it." It's like, "Oh, geez, okay, guys."
But I do think it's a good case study of like there's so much like testing in women's sports and there's so much talk around like supporting, and I think all of that frankly is like crap. Like I think it's like we need to invest in women's sports, and women's sports like there's this huge momentum shift. We look from like 2015 to now, like women's soccer has grown by like it's over 200%. WNBA has grown by over 100%. Women's tennis is over 100%. Like there is a dramatic shift in the market. So like lofty or not, like someone is going to do this. There's huge opportunities here. And I think just women's sports, like we are well positioned to take that opportunity. And I think, we are building the network. We're building, the brand and the tone. And we understand women's sports for what it is. We're not trying to make it anything it's not. We're just trying to cover the space authentically. So for me, our first step is content. Our first step is absolutely content. We build that wedge through content. We grow the audience. We build the brand. We build the relationships. And then from there, I think it's a question of how do we formalize relationships with the leagues? How do we position ourselves to be the best partner for the league? So when, those rights are available, they're saying, yeah, we want to work with Just Women's Sports because that's where the eyeballs are. And we know that they're going to take this game and they're going to build great content around it. That's sort of the vision for me.
Mhm. Yeah, and you're already starting to build good, great content, right? Through that podcast, as you said, and it's more of a interview style, kind of conversational style, and surprise, that's my kind of favorite
Yeah,
stuff. But
yeah.
I think those are the ones, I mean, the evergreen kind of content that you can create where the people are having a legitimate back and forth, especially if the topic is so important to both parties, right? To Kelly and to whomever else is she's on the show, obviously to you as well. And I guess so with that, you just finished season 1, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Of the podcast. Is there now, as you said, you're interested in getting further into that. Does that mean there's going to be, that daily newsletter also turns into a daily podcast? Does that turn into a studio show? Because we've seen everybody can do a studio show from their pretty much their house at
Yep.
this point. Does that turn into a studio show where, obviously 24 hours a day might be a little excessive at first, but getting kind of that sports centery feel, that sports centery vibe, just go over the headlines and the news and the stories. Like how are you trying to, again, this white space, like what are some of the places that you're trying to attack first?
Yeah. So I think for us right now, we're still a small team. We're talking big vision here, but coming back
Mhm.
down to today,
Yeah.
we're still a small team, right? And I think our next step on this journey is twofold. It's growing our digital channels. That means our newsletter, our website, and our social channels, and it's pushing more aggressively into audio. And I think we have one show right now. I'm really, really proud of that show. And I think Kelly's been awesome. And I love these conversations we have with the athletes. And I think, for us, it's what's next. I think audio has been a huge win, right? So like, what other content do we want to push on? What other athletes do we want to work on? What sports do we want to focus on? That's been a little bit challenging in COVID with sports sort of coming and going, as I'm sure you know. But that's definitely, I think, over the next 6 to 18 months, like really getting aggressive in the audio space, I think it's going to be a really big win for us.
That is fantastic. And I'm just writing down, I have a list of like 10 people that I'm excited to introduce you to after this.
Yeah.
That
Love
I think
that. Thank
might
you.
be able to just either point you in a good direction or introduce you to some other cool people. That would be awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, please. I think what you're doing is awesome. I think media, especially positive media, that can possibly help someone, I think would be a
Yeah.
really nice thing to kind of see in the world, especially now. So I think that part's pretty impressive. And I guess How do I ask this question? Like,
Go
what?
for it.
How do you kind of combat those dickheads? Like, just in the comment section. Like, I guess that's the easiest way to say it. Like, there's just
Yeah.
so many stupid people out there that just say dumb shit all the time. Like, how do you like? I know you can't just fight those people, right? Like, because they're
Yeah.
just keyboard warriors. But like, how do you kind of not pay attention to them and really focus on the positives and the actual good things that are coming from what you're doing?
Yeah, to be super honest with you, like, just not concerned with that,
I
and,
hope so. That's awesome.
like,
Good.
just
Keep it that way. Yeah.
like, not concerned at all that if it's not for you, like, our narrative is not at all, like, you should watch women's sports or
Mhm.
you need to, like, if you're not interested, totally fine, and I think what's most exciting is, like, we really don't get that in our community, like,
Awesome.
we really don't,
I
like,
like
I think early on when we first started, there was, like, the typical women get in the kitchen, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we've hit a certain audience size where, like, anytime there's a comment like that, and it's very few and far between, like, our audience goes crazy at that person. They're like,
Good.
get out of here. There's a bunch of self-policing. And like, we really don't see that. And I think that's what's so encouraging is there's like this demographic of people that want women's sports. And maybe they're not going to mainstream media outlets, right? But like they're out there. And I think a lot of them are former athletes that played at a really high level and they love seeing the sport they played on TV and they want to follow that. And that's the audience we're building. And I think that's really exciting. And it's been really positive.
And I think just the numbers that you laid out before, right? Like forgetting about that dumb person for a second, as you said, the numbers of women that are playing sports has increased like such an insane amount over the last
Yeah.
10, 15, 20 years that that audience is very clearly there, right? Like
Yeah.
those people, maybe not every single one of them, right? But like those people are probably interested in what's happening in their sports. And then, as you said, if we can start to get some of those, we see the NBA like manufacture all these storylines, like, oh my
Right.
gosh, like we're still talking about LeBron and Michael Jordan, and it's just like we've been doing this for like 15 years, guys. But it hits every single time. So I'm kind of curious, like,
Yeah.
who is that debate going to be? Is it Lisa Leslie and Super? Like, I don't know who's that debate in the WNBA kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it just let's not recreate the wheel. Let's just do what we need to do. See where those beefs are. See where the incredible
You
performances are.
got
See what
it.
that is,
Yeah.
and people will flock to it, which I think is pretty darn cool. So, Haley, this is awesome. This is
Thank
awesome.
you.
I guess what is like, as we said, like the lofty goal, like, I'm gonna and like and maybe the comparison is kind of annoying, but like the ESPN of strictly just women's sports, like you will
Yeah.
cover it all. You will
Yeah.
tell us what the storylines are, what's happening. Obviously, the interviews is a huge thing. I've seen a lot of the stuff on your site as well. Actually, let me for anybody out there watching, could pop this bad boy up for a second. Look at that.
Look at
Subscribe to the
that.
newsletter. I think that's pretty important. But you have so many, you have the, obviously paying attention to off season. There you go. NBA off season. People care more about that than the actual season itself, right? And talking to the actual the people at the top. There was a huge story. I don't know. I'll be very honest. I don't know if I saw it on your page yet, but with the WNBA, one of the teams, if I'm not mistaken, just came out and where am I trying to
Seattle
go? Yes,
endorsed
thank you.
Biden. Yeah.
Endorsing Biden. Now, I don't care what your political affiliation is, but like that does not happen. You don't really see an entire team or an organization like how is something like that? How are you trying to cover some? Is that like again boots on the ground kind of stuff? Or are you calling up that organization, trying to get that credential, trying to understand and like talk to that person directly? Like how, as a startup media company, how difficult is that conversation to try and have?
Yeah. So right now today we're resource constrained, right? We
Mhm.
have
Yeah,
a
actually.
full-time writer. So like I
Hell
think
yeah.
there's a lot that we want to do that we're not
Mhm.
doing today that are like it's on the roadmap for us. But I think what we've seen so far is that what I'm really, really proud of is often when we reach out to athletes or we reach out to coaches or GMs or whatever, what have you, they're excited. They want to help. They want to talk to us. And I think that has been the biggest brand validation. If you scroll up, there's actually an interview with the Seattle GM on our site right now. I'm not sure if they touch on this or this came out before that. That's the one right there.
Yep,
But,
yep.
I think it's been really cool to see these female athletes and these leagues and these teams, like they get that if we want to make women's sports better and bigger and more sustainable for the future, like we all have to work together. And I think that's been something we've been able to really leverage and like working with the athletes and saying like we're going to do this together. Like that's been a big part of our mission and what we're trying to do right now.
I think it's awesome. kudos, congratulations to you guys
Thanks.
for what you're doing. I think it is pretty darn cool. So make sure, can you give us all the handles, the website, the podcast name, and then I will
You're gonna
also
be
make
shocked by this. It's
oh,
all just women's sports.
dang, that was so nice and easy. I'll make sure to get all the links just in case people forgot that. I mean, we've already
Yeah.
said it a few times during the conversation, but I'll make sure to get all the links to the shows and the all that information, put that in
Awesome.
the show
Thank
notes.
you.
Jeez, at least you gave me your time. You gave me like an hour today. I had an absolute blast. The least I can do is share a couple links.
This
So,
was so fun. Thank you for
yeah,
talking women's sports with me today.
right.
I'm always down to
Sport,
talk women's sports.
let's try and change that, right? Like, let's stop calling it women's sports. It's just sports, right? Like, it's just
I'm actually fine with calling it women's sports. My beef is when we say when sports defaults to men's sports, that's my
mhm,
beef. If you
yeah,
called it men, like, it's the men's US Open and the women's US Open, that's
mhm,
totally fine, right? That's how we
done.
draw those
Yep.
lines.
Mhm,
It's a bummer when it's the World Cup and then the women's World Cup. No, no, no. It's the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup. Like, if we're going to draw those lines, they got to be drawn on both sides, which is why, like, we're proud to be like women's sports. We're proud,
mhm.
just women's sports. But that's, see, I could keep going and
I
I can
get
tell
that.
we're trying to wrap up.
No, no, I'm down to keep going. Like, you're totally fine. What else you got? Lay it on me, Haley. Lay it on
No,
me.
no, I think that's probably more than enough for today.
No, but I think it's awesome. I think it's needed. I think it's important. I think there are stupid people that scoff at things and say the dumb stuff about kitchens. Just to let you know, my wife doesn't cook and she's bad at it. I cook all our meals. So I think, that it's just such a dumb, antiquated thing. It's like the 19, like at least try harder, right? Like if you're gonna try and be funny, just try harder. I don't know. I just think that's kind of stupid, but I
Just
think it's
not
impressive.
concerned, to be honest.
Say it again.
They're just not concerned with those comments. They'll
Yeah,
stop,
good.
you
Yeah,
know?
and especially I like the fact that you said, like, your community is very self-policing, they're gonna kick that person out on their own, which I think is awesome, and there's so much positivity and there's so many good things that can come from what you're doing that I think it's awesome, and I appreciate you giving me some of your time. So again, one more time, Just Women's Sports. Check it out everywhere, go download the podcast, check that out. I guess, when does season 2 of the podcast start?
Next week, more
Ooh,
episodes.
here we go.
Here
Is the
we
first
go.
do we know are you allowed to say who the first episode is with?
Am I?
I
No, I'm
don't
gonna
know.
make it a
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah,
Tune
yeah,
in
let's
Tuesday to check it out.
all right, there we go. Nice little tease for you. But Haley Rosen, founder of Just Women's Sports. Haley, sincerely, sincerely appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Pleasure was all mine. Bye, everybody. Thank you.